This video is not sponsored and has no adverts. Hello and thanks for joining me for what looks like is becoming my monthly landscape photography video. I apologise it's been so long since the last one. It's not my intention to do it monthly, I promise you. But anyway, thank you for joining me. In this video, I'm going to be heading out into a lovely little quarried valley called Cwmorthin near Blaenau Ffestiniog. I've got a couple of shots in mind. One in particular is a mountain lake, and I'll explain more about why I want to get that shot in a little while. Later in the video we'll also be doing the draw for the 3 prints that I promised to give away in my last video, and since it's been so long since I made that, hopefully no more entries are going to come drifting in, so we'll be doing that towards the end of this video. But first, what I normally do with these videos these days is I share images that I've been taking since the last video that weren't actually included in this video, but I've shared on social media. And to be honest with you, January has been pretty dry, not intentionally, but every time I've been out with a camera, there really has been nothing that's caught my eye or that I felt produced a result significantly worth sharing with you. However, there is one image that I thought I would share because it does make a couple of reasonable points for landscape photographers. And it's a composition that I've had my eye on for some time. I was out with the dog one afternoon. I saw the light was right and thought I've only got my camera with me, and all I had was my little iPhone 13 mini. So I got the composition sorted out, and at the point where I was ready to take the shot, the sun went behind a cloud and I was left waiting for about 15 minutes. Squatting down in the water because I really wanted to get the shot looking underneath those branches on the main tree so that the little tree in the background was completely separate from it. Anyway, after about a quarter of an hour or so, the sun came out, I grabbed the shot, checked the shot and realised the dog was in it. And when I went to retake the shot without the dog, the sun went again and it never came back out. So this was the image I was stuck with. Now, of course, I could clone the dog out, but I don't want to clone my own dog out of a picture. But the point I wanted to make about this was that it's very much all about the light. Without the light in this image, it would be completely pointless. I wouldn't even bother. And I could see the light was lovely, and that's why I was prepared to squat in the water with very wet feet for about a quarter of an hour waiting for it. But the lesson really is, even if you're taking a snapshot with your phone, it's worth getting your compositions right and thinking about it. But whenever you point your camera at something, it's always about having that light. Don't waste your time if the light isn't right, because all you'll be doing is taking a reference shot of the composition. And having said all of that, one of the shots that I'm about to share with you completely breaks that whole suggestion that you should only bother if you've got the light. So let me explain. I'm a member of the Royal Photographic Society, and they're currently running a project in association with the Royal Geographical Society. And what they wanted to do was to create an archive of images at all of the major latitude and longitude intersections in the UK. Now, it just so happens that one of those is right in the middle of my patch in Snowdonia. So I thought, oh, I'll have a go at that one. It's 53 degrees north and 4 degrees west, and it happens to occur just at the top end of quite a well-known little valley called Cwmorthin. There's a quarry right up on the top of the Bwlch called Eryri, and a little twin lakes, and luckily the intersection point of the latitude and longitude is just on the shore of the lake. So I decided that I would be standing exactly on that intersection and point my camera at whatever I can see from there. Now, when I headed out, I decided that I would just take my 14 to 150 on my main body, the EM1 Mark II, but this lovely little lens is just a brilliant mountain lens because it only weighs 285 grams, but it's a full frame equivalent focal range of 28 to 300, which is absolutely brilliant. It's so flexible. Now, of course, the image quality really isn't a patch on the Pro Glass that I also have. But for the purposes of what I had in mind, the likely conditions I was going to experience, And bearing in mind, I've been using it a long time and I do trust it. I don't think I'm missing out too much. So let's head up into the mountains and see how it all pans out. Well, here I am on this beautiful little upland lake called Blaenau Ffestiniog. It's got a little twin lake slightly further up the valley. And I'm overlooking the beautiful peak of Cwmorthin, which is completely hidden. When I set out this morning, I had it in mind that Cwmorthin would be the backdrop for the image that I'm after. Here I am at 53 north and 4 west, and there's nothing to see. The lake looks lovely, but the light was great when I set out, but by the time I got up here, it's Snowdonia. What do you expect? It's January. Fabulous hike, really enjoyed it. But I'm very challenged by what I'm going to do with this image, because obviously I've got to take it from a certain location. I can point my camera in any direction. And the obvious thing to do, of course, is to point it all the way down the valley to Cwmorthin. I don't have a drop off from the lake, so I've got these bounding rocks over on the far side. Cwmorthin in the clouds, very unlikely to clear. These clouds are set in for the rest of the day, so this is really just a reference. I'm going to have a go at the shot and talk you through my thoughts when I've had a chance to get my head round it, and we'll see what I can come up with. So I'm putting this together as a 4-shot panorama, and really it's just for reference purposes in terms of the composition, where I've got the view down to Cwmorthin over on the left hand side, across to the centre of the frame, where when I come back and take the real shot I should have Cwmorthin as my backdrop, and then just across, about halfway across the lake, to be on my right hand side. Now, even though this is a record shot, I don't like wasting my time, so what I'm going to do is try and do something reasonably imaginative with it. So I've got a gentle ripple despite these gusts of savage wind hurtling up from Cwmorthin. The lake, because it's kind of tucked down in a bowl, is rippling gently. Now, I don't want to use a long exposure, because what I don't want to do is to just have it completely flat, but I also don't want the ripples to be pin sharp. I just want to kind of smudge them a little bit. So in order to do that, what I've done is I've set my aperture a bit smaller than I would normally go. So I'm down to f8, which is getting me a shutter speed of 1/30. It's not particularly slow, but because I'm using the high resolution mode, what the camera's doing, it's taking 8 shots every time and stitching those together so that the net effect is a much slower shutter speed. And I'm hopeful that when it all comes together, it will give me the effect that I'm looking for. Well, I'm pleased to say I've got down off the ridge and it's much warmer down here in the valley. I'm down at the quarry at Cwmorthin, although it isn't really much of a quarry because the slate production around here was predominantly underground, with a mine that connects through the hillside to the Oakley estate on the Blaenau Ffestiniog side. This valley was first quarried around about 1810, and it really wasn't very productive, so it had a pretty checkered history through up until about the turn of the 20th century, when it was taken over by the much bigger Blaenau Ffestiniog organisation. And following that, it was pretty much mothballed. So this valley has a couple of little buildings, but not as much scarring as some of the other quarried locations in these hills. I'm sat on the doorstep of what was probably the quarry manager's house. A lot of these quarries have one really distinctive building. For example, there's one on the Watkin path on Snowdonia up at Cwmorthin, very similar to this sort of building. Now, as it happens, I think I might have found a subject for my RPS project. So what I thought I'd do is just have a pit stop. It's time for a cup of coffee and a spot of lunch, and then I'll show you what I've got in mind. So I'm inside the old quarry manager's house, and you can probably tell by how echoey it is in here, but there's no roof at all. And I found this amazing tree. Goodness knows how it's managed to grow there, because it looks as if it's coming out of solid stone. I've no idea where the root system is. So I've used these couple of planks in the foreground here, beautiful mossy old roof timbers. And I thought, yeah, okay, but it's kind of a bit cheesy. It's a bit trite. It's too obvious. So I think what I might do is head down into this basement area and point the camera upwards, see what I can do with that. Okay, so I've had a go at looking straight up at the tree, lying on my back underneath it, but it's just not going to work at all. It's too tucked into the corner. So I've stepped back a little bit, and what I found with this shot is there are two windows, and because the mountainside immediately behind the property is so steep, you're looking straight out at them. There's no sky at all. Now, I don't have to worry about the light here. It's pretty flat, but even if it was bright sunlight, next to none is going to get into this building where I'm shooting, so I'm not going to get any better light here for this particular shot. And I was lucky this morning when I was walking up through the valley. I did grab a few handheld shots that I'll share with you later. But what I've done with this, I've got the two windows and the tree kind of snaking up alongside them. And then with this wall, there are a couple of big lintels that point in towards it where there were old fireplaces. So I'm hopeful that I'll be able to make something of this. Now, again, as I was up on the ridge, I'm using the high resolution mode. So I'm going to have 50 megapixels to work with. There's nothing moving in the frame in this one. The reason I'm using that particular mode is because I know I'm going to need a lot of pixels to work with in post, because this image will only work if I can get in really close on those pixels and really pick out the detail in that tree to make it stand out. Now, the slate of the walls behind it is nice and dark, and the tree actually is quite light. There is light coming through where the roof used to be. But I really want to pick it out along these branches in post, and I'll show you how I'm going to go about that with the dodging and burning that I'm going to do. So I came home with my pixels, and let's have a look at what I was able to do with them, if anything. So this is pretty much the unedited raw file. I have done the digital conversion and I've opened it in Photoshop as a TIFF. The reason I thought I'd do it in Photoshop is because I can use the Lightroom engine in the camera raw filter, because more of you will be familiar with that. I'm currently using DxO for my main processing, but I figured that this hopefully would be more useful to demonstrate this. And it's only going to be a very quick, rough demonstration of the steps that I would take. So the first thing looking at this straight away is I can see the top half is actually quite a bit darker than the bottom half, and that's because I had a 0.9 soft grad on. I was trying to control the highlights in the sky, and of course, given the shape of it, there was really no way to angle it. Of course, I could have bracketed, I could exposure blend, but to be honest, there really isn't any need to do that. It's much quicker and simpler to do what I'm about to do. So the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate this layer, and I'm going to apologize if my system runs a bit slow, because this is, of course, a colossal file. So I've used Control-J just to duplicate the layer. There's lots of different ways to do that. You can easily look it up. And now what I'm going to do is convert this layer into a smart object, and that allows me to revisit anything I do in the filter so that I can adjust it. And we're going to use Camera Raw Filter for this, and I'm just going to do a couple of very quick overall adjustments, and these are adjustments that I would normally do in DxO Photo Lab. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a graduated filter up from the bottom to meet the one that I had, to even up this exposure a little bit. Now it might seem counterintuitive because I'm actually darkening down that tree, but in effect what I'm doing from the standpoint of the overall image is darkening the whole lot down, not evening the whole lot up, I should say. So that's the filter darken down to even it up top and bottom. Then I'm going to take the overall exposure down just a little. I'm going to pull my highlights down, but I'm going to ease the shadows just a smidgen. That sort of thing there, that'll do as my base. So if I just OK that, you'll see it transform in a moment, and that's all nicely evened up. Now, this isn't remotely how the finished image is going to be shown to you later on. This is just to demonstrate the small elements of the many processes that I did on it. So I'm going to now take a composite of those underlying layers with Shift, Option, Command E. So I now have a composite layer of everything underneath. You can use Merge Up as well if you want to. Convert that to a smart object. So go back into Camera Raw Filter. Okay, there we are. And then I want a brush tool. And this is where all of those pixels comes in. Because when I zoom in here to 200%, as you can see, I can get in really tight, but I've still got plenty of detail to work with to allow me to target this really easily. Now, I'm going to paint over this top section because this section of the tree is already quite pale. So there are going to be two separate brush processes on this, one for these brighter areas, which are going to be brighter still, and one for the darker areas. So something like that. Let's zoom back out. Then what we'll do is grab our exposure slider, and we're going to be quite cavalier with it. You can see how bright that's come up there. That'll do nicely. Now I'm going to want another brush. So I'm going to hit K again, create a new brush. And this is going to be for the lower half. Let me just come in really tight on this. I'm not going to do the whole trunk because I want to show you, I want to leave some of the original in place to show you the difference it makes. But as you can see, with a feathered brush, you can actually target it really quite accurately. It takes a bit of time. You don't want to rush it. Let's slide that down a bit more. Come down the bottom. I probably could use a slightly bigger brush on this, but what I absolutely don't want to do, a bit like a kiddie's colouring book, I don't want to go outside the lines. because otherwise you're going to end up with a halo on the wall behind it, and that just wouldn't look right at all. Now, you can take it as read that I'd spent probably the best part of an hour processing this image when I was doing the one that I'm going to show you later. However, we've painted that in. I'm not going to go any further down than that. Let's just come out and see how far down I've gone. Yeah, that'll just about do it. Okay, we'll pull the exposure up on that one, but with the previous brush we didn't touch the shadow slider, whereas on this one we're going to, and in fact I'm going to even bring the exposure up a bit more. Now obviously that kind of looks a bit weird, as you can imagine. Let's just brush in a bit more down here. Okay, that'll do us. Oh, rabbit, let's just take it right down to the bottom. Okay, that'll do. So I'm just going to OK that. Now, as you can see, that looks absolutely ridiculous. I haven't balanced it up at all well. However, I'm sure you get the idea. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this layer where I've brushed onto the tree, and I'm going to reduce the opacity of the layer. And that's why I overdid it, because this is where you introduce the subtlety that makes it stand out and yet still look realistic. So I drop it down just a smidgen below 70%, and all of a sudden it looks quite good. It looks like it's just catching a bit of light. I probably would even up the top and bottom of the tree a little bit more, but I'm sure you get the idea. So I've merged up to another composite layer and then converted it to a smart object, and this time we're going to be using Nik Viveza 3. Okay, so what we want to do is create a control point that targets this fireplace, and we'll click right in the middle of that rusty steel plate. Now I'm going to switch the mask on, and as you can see the selection is a little bit broad. Now we know that that has got a lot of red in it, so if we ask it to select based on the colour, all of a sudden it's getting much more accurate, and that is much more useful. And if we add in a little bit of luminance as well, it's going to be even more accurate. But I do want to also include this side as well. So what I'm going to do before I do the adjustments is just hold my Option key down and create another one just in there like that. And again, if I emphasize the chrominance, a little bit more selective, and that's much closer to what I actually want to select. And I'm not really worried that it's selected the tree, because I'm doing it on a separate layer. I can mask that when I'm back in Photoshop. So what we'll do with these is just switch that off, switch off the masks, and I'm going to group those two because I want to do the same adjustments for both points. So I'm just going to group those, and then when I do my adjustments they'll both be affected exactly the same. So I want to warm it up, I want to emphasize the red, and I want to brighten it slightly. Now as you can see, that's really giving it some welly, perhaps even slightly over the top for me, that one. Something like that, that's better, that's what I was after. Okay, so I'm going to apply that. So there's that adjustment applied in Photoshop. Actually, it's not too bad as it stands, but just for the sake of completeness of the demonstration, what I'm going to do is just create an inverted mask. So I now can't see any of that adjustment. But if I select my brush tool with a white brush and just brush it in there, what that's doing now is making sure that it's only the fireplace that it's affected, and it hasn't turned the bottom of the tree red as well. So we're very targeted. And then of course, because that is quite exaggerated, we bring the opacity down a little. That's more like it. Again, we're around 70%. But hopefully you get the idea of how I approach this sort of thing. I'm always using my pixels as a starting point, and then I'll do whatever I feel I fancy doing in Lightroom, DxO, Photolab, Photoshop, whatever, to make a final image, because that's really what my photography is all about. It's very much about creating an image. I'm not really trying to produce something that says, hey, this is exactly what it looked like when we were stood there in this old building. Anyway, here's the final image after some much more considered adjustments for you to have a look at. Right, so it's time to pick the winners of the 3 prints giveaway. So here we go. I've got one of these online random picker things. I'm just going to paste in the URL of the video, and what this does, it grabs 3 of the commenter names completely randomly, allegedly. We'll find out. If it's 3 of my mates, I'll redo it. I've told it I want 3 names. It's got 94 unique commenters, so let's start raffle and pick winners. There we go. We've got David Travis, Paulus and Glyn C. So if you'd like to write in through my website at dgriff.gallery/contact, let me know which image you'd like. And by the way, it doesn't have to be one of the images from the last video. It can be anything you've ever seen from me, anytime. Because frankly, some of my best work wasn't in 2021, it's in preceding years. But anyway, by all means, feel free to pick a print, write into me, let me know where to send it, and I'll get those out to you as soon as I possibly can. So I've got a few images to share with you at the end that I took as I was along the way at Cwmorthin, but I'm going to leave it there for this one. Thank you ever so much for watching. Really hope you've enjoyed it. And if you have, why not subscribe now and join me next time? Cheers.